So good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Vou começar a falar um pouquinho em português. Todo o seminário, todo o webinar vai ser feito em inglês, sem tradução. Os slides iniciais que eu vou introduzir um pouco o webinar, eu vou falar eles em inglês e o seminário estará falado em inglês e os slides em português. Parece somente os slides iniciais, mas toda a discussão vai ser feita em inglês. Bom, é um prazer, bem-vindos. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. I think there are some characteristics that I want to mention up front, which are very, in my opinion, innovative and interesting, because we're doing, in Insper, perhaps the first binational webinar. We have invitees from Brazil and from Holland in order to discuss the perspectives in each of the country on the urban logistics and the impact of the COVID-19 in both countries, and to bring you guys different perspectives. So as you see, I'm going to project now very quickly some slides just to introduce here the workshop, the webinar. Sorry. So welcome again. We will, it's a pleasure to have here with us in a joint venture, I would say, the Consulate of Holland, together with us, and also the sponsorship of Insper. Insper is an institution, an education and research institution, without profitable results, without profit objectives, and we want to become a reference center on education and generation of knowledge. We cover significantly all the spectrum of education, from undergrad to grad schools, lato sensu and stricto sensu, and also executive education. And our main philosophy in all these programs is that the student is the protagonist of in the class. The professor is much more a facilitator. And a second thing to mention, the school acts very integrated in all its program. One thing, there are several opportunities that you can see on this for you to participate in Insper. And there's the numbers like students. There are 7,000 students in short duration course, more than 6,000 students in long duration. We have more than 20,000 alumni. Both scholarship, we have 263 and so forth. I want just to get your attention to one thing that's very important for us is the scholarship program. It started in 2004, and we already have more than 300 scholarship students that were awarded scholarship already graduated. 263 students now undergoing their studies with Insper with a scholarship, and more than 12% or 12% of the total undergrad students were awarded scholarships. So that's a very important thing for us, because it makes us very proud to say that if you are a student, you pass the exams here to get into Insper, you will be at Insper. No problem what's your social condition, you will be at Insper, and we want you to be with us. So it's a very important thing, and it's a very important thing from the community standpoint too, because most of the program is financed through donations of companies and also of individual people. So it's a pleasure to mention that to you guys. And what we are going to, I'm the mediator. I have this nice perspective here, because I'm going to be watching and asking questions and promoting the debate. I'm a professor at Insper, called Professor Senior Fellow at Insper, and basically on the part of strategy and operations courses. And I've been with Insper for more than 20 years already. So how we are going to do with the workshop, which I think is very interesting, just a brief agenda. We'll have an opening from the consul, Ms. Henriette Bercy. Of course, she will understand that my pronunciation is not the perfect one. Hope she excuse myself. I try to do my best here, Henriette, but it's a pleasure to have her with us here. And then we are going to have the interventions from our invitees. There are 4 people. I'm going to introduce them after this opening. And then at the end, we'll enter on the Q&A questions from the participants. That doesn't mean that you have to wait until the end to introduce your questions through YouTube chat. Please do so as we speak, and we will have follow up the questions as we get into these sections of Q&A, okay? So without further delay, I want to introduce, just a second, let me just stop sharing my screen here for a minute. All this technology is also very nice, but it requires you a lot of coordination. Okay, just a second, okay. Hope now nobody's seeing my screen again. And we have here, I have the pleasure to introduce again Miss Henriette Bercy, the consul in São Paulo from Holland. And Henriette has a specific background that's very much interesting, and that she's going to be able to talk to us a little bit about urban planning and sustainability, specifically to open up this binationality of this workshop, making comparisons of Amsterdam or Holland in general and Brazil. Please, with the word, Henriette, the pleasure to have you here again.
Thank you, Luis, and good morning. Good afternoon, panelists and participants in Brazil and in the Netherlands. Because of Corona, we are not able to travel, but fortunately, thanks to technology, we're still able to interact. And I would like to thank Insper for setting up this meeting, this important meeting about urban logistics. And yes, Louise, sustainable urban development is something very close to my heart. That has to do with former roles I played in the Dutch government. At the start of the millennium, I was for 8 years the lead negotiator for the Netherlands in international climate change treaties. And before I came to São Paulo 2 years ago, I was heading the Department of Spatial Policies in the Ministry of Transport and the Environment, where we worked on integrating environment and transport in spatial planning. And one of my jobs was promoting smart city concepts in the Netherlands, working together with cities, private companies, but also we went abroad to China, to India, and to the United States. Because smart cities is really a topic which is very much, which gets a lot of attention these days. I don't think that I have to explain to this audience how important cities are. More than 60% already of the world population is living in cities today. And the UN estimates that in 2050, 2/3 of the world population will be living in cities. And I don't know whether the Corona crisis will have an impact on that estimation. I think it's early to say yet, but we will have to see what will be the Corona impact on spatial planning and urban development. Cities are economic, cultural, and innovative hotspots. You need cities in order to get progress, to get growth, especially countries who are specializing in the service industries. But at the same time, cities have a lot of problems. I only have to mention air pollution. It's very unhealthy to live in most cities around the world. We have to be clear about that. It's Sao Paulo. I also lived in Mexico City, but I also lived, of course, in the Netherlands. Cities are still unhealthy. So cities are also producers of a lot of emissions, CO2 emissions, in the building environment and also in transport. And at the same time, cities suffer a lot of climate change. And I can mention water management, for instance, in São Paulo and in the Netherlands, very important. It's either raining too much or it's not raining at all. And also what you see in cities is when temperatures rises, the temperature within cities is rising much faster. And so some cities will be unbearable to live in the future if we don't do anything. And then, of course, the last issue I want to mention is transport, traffic. Traffic is hell in most cities. It's hell in Sao Paulo, especially when it's raining, but it's also hell in the western part of the Netherlands during rush hour. So the question is, how do we make our cities more welcoming, more livable, more efficient, healthier, and competing? And how can existing technologies and new technologies perhaps help us to solve these problems? All cities are dealing with this at their own level and their own scale. Amsterdam, they have not even 1 million inhabitants, but also Sao Paulo, the metropolitan region, having a population of more than 20 million people. The Netherlands have a long tradition in logistics. We have, of course, the famous Port of Amsterdam. We have the other main ports, the airport of Schiphol. We have the distribution centers. But we are also already well known in dealing with the last mile in deliveries of food and retail. And in cities like Amsterdam, there is a growing competition for the road, by taxis, by buses, by cars, bicycles, tourists on bicycles. They are the worst, I think. And of course, delivery trucks. And we are talking about delivery, of course, the rest of this seminar. But also in Sao Paulo, we see this same problem on a different scale. But it would be interesting to exchange experience on this, I think. So I'm looking very much forward to this webinar, and I honestly hope that it is not the end, but only a beginning of more cooperation between the Netherlands, Amsterdam, Sao Paulo, Brazil on urban development. Brazil and the Netherlands always have good friends. So I hope that we can continue to work on this specific issue. And the consulate is very willing to play its part in this. And I hope we will have an inspiring exchange of ideas and solutions. So this is for now, Luis. Thank you very much, and good luck.
So without further delay, I'm going to introduce our panelists here now, which are, we have Priscilla Carvalho. Priscilla is a partner at EY Consulting. We have Felipe Trevisan. He is the CEO and founder of VUX, with 2 X's, which is a digital freight platform here in Brazil. And from Amsterdam, we have the pleasure to introduce Walther Ploos van Amstel. Hopefully I got your name reasonably right, Walther. City Logistics professor at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. And we also have, the least but not less important, Hans Lingemann, who is a CEO and founder of Parcels, without an E, which is a network of micro-urban distribution centers, specifically in the city of Amsterdam. I hope everybody enjoyed their interventions, because we prepared some questions to motivate their discussion. So they're going to talk specifically about that. And our main purpose here is to share knowledge and share interactions, okay, of this knowledge among the 2 countries. So starting out with Priscilla. Priscilla, what are the key impacts on cost and service level that you've seen here in Brazil especially on the last mile logistics, given the crisis we are living with the COVID-19. So,
thank you, Luis. Good morning, everyone. Thinking about cost and service level in urban logistics, first we have to think about how the customers has changed their behavior. This is the main issue that all logistics professionals are facing right now. Not only logistics, but the entire supply chain. Thinking about that, UI has been doing research, and globally, in May, this research has been launched with more than 10,000 interviews and more than almost 13 countries had participating in this research, in which we are monitor the customer behavior in a monthly basis. This UI Future Customer Index, we are trying to identify key aspects about the behavior that can impact all companies around the world. And based on that research, we saw that in the beginning of the crisis, more than 80% of people has changed their consumption behavior and shift from the online channel. More than 40% of the interviews said that they changed the entire consumptions to online purchase. So when we look at this, and in the beginning of the crisis, I've spoken with colleagues in the transportation companies that were specifically attending the online channel. Their volume has doubled in the beginning of the crisis, and also the standard procedure to deliver has changed. How this impacted the cost in the companies and for us, the consumers. In the beginning, we could see that some of our clients mentioned that the last mile cost distribution had increased by 30 to 40% only in the last mile because of the high volume, low availability of specific trucks to do it, mainly in the metropolitan regions, and also because they were not prepared in terms of technology to support all the demand, and also people, because they have to separate their team and reduce working hours and have some restrictions to operate. So these two aspects, the demand increase and also the reduce of the available capacity, has increased the cost by 30 to 40%. And the service level, for those who live in the big cities, we could feel that by ourselves, that some things that going to take 2 days to be delivered, they had the lead time to increase by 10 to 15 days. So these were the main impact in the beginning of the crisis. Then companies start to be more prepared and design the operation according to the demand. And this impact has setting down in a smoothly way. But now all the companies has to rethink about how it's going to be in the new normal, because the trend to increase the online shop was accelerated, and we don't believe this is going to be back before as the level that was in the crisis before the crisis. So we need now to be prepared to optimize and reduce the costs, because it's impossible to keep the operation running in the cost level that we are today. So in my opinion, and what we saw about the customers, clients, and markets and news, is what you get.
Thank you, Priscilla. I think you mentioned some key drivers, and I believe one is really the customers, the consumers, and I would say the customers in general, if I put also B2B relationships, are changing their behavior. And that has a major impact in the cost and service level that we have specifically in urban logistics. More than that, right? I mean, you specifically mentioned online shopping. And online shopping is a trend, was a trend, and it has been accelerated according to your research and so forth. And for sure, we need to be better prepared to deliver the goods, especially in urban centers. So I'm curious, I'm very curious to talk to Walther now in order to let him explain me how did Amsterdam reacted during the beginning of this COVID crisis, 19 crisis, and how are things today. It would be interesting, specifically, Walther, to mention about collaboration. I think yes. What we have seen, and this is that collaboration has been a major part of maintaining the city supply. So without further delay, Walther, why don't you comment a little bit about how you guys are solving the problems?
Yeah, let me take you to Amsterdam and to city logistics in Amsterdam. The big volumes in city logistics in Amsterdam are construction materials. They are food related, like going to horeca, hotels, restaurants, cafes, retail, food, non-food. Waste is a very big thing in city logistics. Oh yeah, and we also have parcels. We will talk with Hans later. Parcels in Amsterdam is about 5% of the truck movements. And many of them are light commercial vehicles, for small ones. What happened in Amsterdam after March 13th? On March 13th, the clock went completely the other way. We closed all bars, all restaurants, all cafes. We closed all the musea and all the hotels, which already had a steady decline because everybody felt like we don't want to travel anymore. So hotels closed. Retail food stayed open. I'm going to tell you more about that. Retail non-food, most of the stores closed because they didn't have any customers. People really stayed at home. And we are very good people in Amsterdam. And the Dutch are always very good. And we have Santa Claus, so if we do things wrong, we'll be sent to Madrid. No, we did our best. About 50% of the people in the Netherlands really stayed at home in the first initial 2 weeks. Slowly, more and more people got working. Like in construction, people kept working. There was no lockdown for construction companies. So 1/3 of the good flows in Amsterdam were steady, still going. But we've seen major shifts. We've seen two things, and that helped us with collaboration. First is we didn't go out to bars anymore, to restaurants. We didn't eat the catering at our company. And about 1/3 of the food in volume we eat in Amsterdam is out of home. So there was a sudden shift. People stayed at home, and suddenly there was like 35% of the food market we were buying at stores. So what the store saw was an increase of 40 to 50% in the volume going to the retail stores. And like the big companies like Albert Heijn, Delhaize, Jumbo, they had a huge increase in the volume. And even worse, there were specific products that they buy. So when you got into a store, you felt like, why is half of the store empty? And from a lot of products, like the 60 different kind of olives we have, all the shelves were still full. So the fast-moving consumer goods became even faster moving. That was a challenge because in food service, companies like Bitfood, Sligo, who deliver to bars and restaurants, they felt their volume completely gone. Only hospitals were open. So there was a decrease of 90% in the volume going to the food service channel. And the food service channel uses 15 to 20% more trucks than food retail. It's a very inefficient organization, and it became clear that it was really, really inefficient. I think in Brazil that will be the same. And the logistic footprint of deliveries to hotels and restaurants is quite big. The interesting thing was in terms of collaboration, because Albert Heijn had an immediate problem in the number of trucks they needed. So the first thing they did was they went to the government and said, please, can we also deliver at night? That was good. Can we keep the time windows? Can we close our time windows? And normally you have to ship between 9 and 11. Now you can ship 24 hours a day. And a national agreement, a truck driver can now drive 11 hours per day instead of the usual 10. So capacity and planning became more simple. But collaboration also helps. All the partners of Albert Heijn, Ahold, are in one control tower, Simaken, also Jumbo, also others. And by sharing data, they could find where do we have truck drivers, where do we have trucks, where the volumes are going to. And since fast-moving consumer goods is used, the barcode scanning, phenomenon is inventories. There's complete transparency of the supply chain. So immediately we saw two things. First of all, that food service wholesale, they were opened up for consumers. So you could get your groceries not only at the traditional store, but also at the wholesale, which makes sense. You would have had a lot of food waste if you wouldn't do that. And all the companies started exchanging the capacities. So we had truck drivers for company A in trucks from company B delivering to company C. And that helped us through that period. So the capacity which was there and which is clearly available could immediately be shared. So the biggest thing we learned from the actual impact of Corona was you need data. And the industries that have data, they did well. In fact, the transport companies even made a good profit during the last months. So shifting from food retail to food service. Another thing we saw was a huge increase in do-it-yourself. People went to the do-it-yourself store and started, but that was a very volatile market. And what the good news was there, that people found their way to marketplaces. Worldwide, you have Uber Freight. Locally, we have Quick Cargo. And transport companies used marketplaces 3 to 4 times more than before the Corona crisis. So thanks to data and transparency, they helped. Another thing which we saw was the parcels. If you look at parcels, Hans will recognize that we're still at Christmas. And it's not only small parcels, but what we now see people buying big parcels. The fitness equipment, TV sets, it's much bigger. But the good thing is that with the transparency of track and trace, a very good insight into what the capacities are, the service level of the logistics service providers actually doing parcel deliveries did not go down. They did an excellent job. They were very agile. And the service level, which is around 92% in the Netherlands, which includes mistakes made by the web store. So the not home percentage was really low because everybody was at home. The parcel companies did a great job and are still doing a great job in getting into our cities. Slowly we see changes. Bars are opening again. Wholesale in food is back to 60% of normal. We see the sales going down in retail food. So thanks to the collaboration, there's a big shift from truck drivers from retail to food service again. I think this was an excellent example. So once again, construction materials, no problem because we did not stop. The non-food retail, that was a bit of a painful situation for some transport companies, but thanks to the marketplaces like Quick Cargo, they could work for other industries as well. What was a big problem and still is a big problem is because of the uniqueness of all the vehicles is waste. Because we have like 30 to 40% more waste in the streets because people started cleaning up their houses. Had huge parcels. If you see the paper on our street, it's one big mess. It looks like Naples. I'm sorry for all the Italians in the room, but it's we need to think about something in the future there. And one of the critical things with waste is we do not have like point of sale information. And I think for the government in Amsterdam, it will be critical to get sensors and all into the containers, create on-demand waste systems. So there's a lot to be learned from that as well.
Thank you, Walter. I think you cover a lot of things on the 5 to 7 minutes that you spoke. I just want to mention one thing that's interesting, the shift from food retail to wholesale and so wholesale to retail and so forth is interesting because in the past, I personally have done several studies regarding this. We were always trying to segment the supply chain as much as we could in order to become efficient on a specific channel and specific customers and so forth. And all of a sudden, given the shift that happened, we had to not segment anymore. We have to collaborate. We have to make sure that we use
the interesting thing is that in the past, the transportation companies already moved into both channels. If you go to France, you have Stef Group. They provide both food service and food retail. Peter Appel, Simon Loos, Euser, big Dutch transport companies, they service both channels.
Yes.
What's very interesting is that companies like in food service are doing 80% transport on own account. That was complicated. And they were included now, so there were actually drivers who only used to work for one single company in the truck of company B, working for competitor C. So the collaboration there was very well. So what we learned in the past, they don't, and it's very opportunistic. They learned one thing, collaborate, and they also learned one thing, get rid of your own trucks, start outsourcing to professional companies.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing very interesting, right? Because we're moving from only speaking about collaboration in supply chain and not really doing it, to, because of a crisis, having the benefit of really experience what are the benefits of collaboration. I think you mentioned information has been a key thing, and I do appreciate and the transparency on this information is the most important thing. I hope, really hope there are some residual effects after the crisis, as you mentioned, is it opening back again the retail, the bars and restaurants and so forth. Yep. I hope the residual effect of collaboration remains there, and we don't forget what we learned during the crisis. With that, I would like to call in Felipe, and I think there is an issue that Walther did not really touch upon, but is underlying it in a very clear way, which is the legislation. Specifically for a startup like yourself, Felipe, there are some worldwide legislation issues to develop a business. Often, this legislation doesn't follow as quickly as the technology on these startups are following, and we can see collaboration, exchanging information, protection, data protection laws, and so forth. This should be much more quicker adapting to the evolution of technology than perhaps it is. With this crisis that we live, do you think that our legislators or the legislation has a potential to adapt faster to the new technology needs and to the new technology availability? That's the question that I put to you, Felipe, and I'm sure that Hans is holding his horse because he also wants to put his opinion on this. I'll let you talk at the end, Hans, on this. But Felipe, why don't you talk to us about this?
All right. Thank you, Luis. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, I believe so. And I believe governments wants to update their legislations faster. Yeah. I believe that also the private sector and tech companies should help governments to do it. It's not an easy task at all, and we need cooperation here. After all, technology exists to make our life simple, and so should be legislation. Yeah. I want to give a quick example here about legislation in Brazil and how COVID-19 can help it and make it to change it. Yeah. So today in Brazil, some companies demand proof of deliveries from transportation companies in order to authorize their payment. So basically a piece of paper. If you have a digital proof of delivery, you cannot use it. They need the piece of paper. It's not only cultural, but also regulatory things that we face here in Brazil. And even though this looks crazy when you think about technology and in 2020, when you think about COVID-19, we know that sharing pens and papers is an important means of contagion. So it's one more thing to speed up legislation in such a way that we can formally authorize and encourage the use of digital proof of deliveries. I know that's a very simple example under the whole context that we have here. And I think it's good to understand the importance of regulatory issues in more complex stuff regarding urban logistics. For example, Walther said about delivery time windows, and we have regulatory issues here that you cannot enter and you cannot have traffic with cargo vehicles inside the city during the night. But it's good now. If we could allow that, would be good. So we need to be quick about that to guarantee supply. Crowdsourcing. I think Priscilla has mentioned that e-commerce is growing a lot during this crisis, as well as groceries and food deliveries. And basically, we have a bottleneck here when you look to supply. And without crowdsourcing apps, we couldn't make it available to people here. So basically, without them, we were struggling even more with supply. And there is no clear legislation for crowdsourcing appings nowadays in Brazil. So it's one more thing that we need to hurry up to have it. The same for Uber-like transportation companies, that the legislation is quite complex. It's good to have it simplified. And we have also issues with carpooling. There are some fiscal documents that are complex to have them if you are doing carpooling. As Walther said, we need to optimize the last mile, but legislation makes it a little bit difficult when you think about that. So when you think about this, these are current issues. We have drones, robots, so definitely we need to speed up how legislation is changing. And I think legislation updates should speed up in a way that we should think about the next disruptive things, and not only the things that were disruptive 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 3 years ago, or now. We need to have legislation thinking about the future, and that's, I think, the main reason that we should speed up. And this crisis, in my opinion, will definitely create or improve a sense of urgency in all governments. I think it's mandatory to speed it up.
Perfectly. Thank you, Felipe. I think clearly two things caught my attention, Felipe, that you mentioned. Technology makes our life easier, so should legislation too. So I think that is a must, and if things they should be developed in parallel in order to really make our lives easier. Because, as you mentioned, very simple problems or issues can really decrease the value or decrease the way that technology makes our life easier. So the parallelism is very important. And I like the comment that specifically the crisis has put us some pressure on some things that before we didn't have that much pressure. And hopefully legislation will follow through very quickly. And that, again, that's a residual effect once we leave the crisis. So very interesting point. And I want, of course, to get now to Hans. Finally, Hans. And I'm going to put a more general, broader question, Hans. But of course, you're welcome to talk a little bit about Felipe's issues about legislation. How is it in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands in general? But the question to you mostly is like, you as a multi-client urban hub solution in Amsterdam depends a lot on two things: technology and collaboration. And we touched upon a little bit of technology and we touched a little bit of collaboration. My question to you is, what were the main issues, or what are still the main issues, if there are some, to launch such an interesting solution? And I believe you can certainly fit in legislation as part of your answer, but don't focus only on legislation, please. We're curious about a lot of effects that we can learn from Amsterdam. Go ahead, Hans. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you, Insper, for organizing this webinar. Good morning, good afternoon from a cloudy the Netherlands. I think I'm an entrepreneur, so I was thinking solutions. So it took some time for me to think in issues. There's an enormous list of issues, but that I think should be changed, and we're trying to change that as a company. Maybe to start with is that the whole logistics chain is really a matter of efficiency, automation, and a cost model. And you can see that from if you talk to carrier companies. And I found that very interesting. When you talk about who is the client and the customer, then the carrier company would typically say, well, the customer is the party that pays me. That's the web shop or the e-commerce. And that's interesting, because the web shop is going to behave like a customer. And if you are a very big web shop, then the first thing that you do, if you are big, you invite a lot of carriers and you tell them, well, I've got a lot of volume here, all these parcels that I want to send to the consumer, and who's going to give me the best price for that? And all the carriers compete on price, not on value. I think that's fundamentally something that we should change. And I think the carriers should worry more about the consumer in the cities, of course, that's where we play a role. And if they worry about the consumer and his or her needs in the city, then the web shop will be happy as well. So that's one issue. Then we talk about collaboration. Well, I'm now 3 years in this business, and I think collaboration is something I'm looking for. The carriers are very much looking on their own. So you have the big carriers in the Netherlands. There are 5 of them. They're not used to collaborate, and that's if you are an independent pickup point like we are, we say to all the carriers, send all your parcels to our place and the consumer will pick it up. And we managed to have this deal with 4 out of the 5 carriers, but the biggest carrier in the Netherlands refuses to give up what they say their exclusivity. So that's a big problem. Then thirdly, I think what you see is that the norm in the Netherlands, unfortunately, is free home delivery. So if you buy stuff in a web shop, then you typically have 2 options. That's do you want it delivered at home, probably the same day or the next day, which is ecologically a disaster, I can tell you. Or do you want to pick it up from a pickup point? And that's as free as the first option, by the way. So most people, of course, choose, that's 80%, choose for the free home delivery option. And there's a problem with that word free, because it is intrinsically telling you that the service that the logistics chain is doing there is of no value because you didn't pay for it. And if you shop more than, let's say, 3 times a week at different stores, then you probably have to make a decision every time you are in the checkout. Do I want this home delivered? Depending on the relationship with the carrier, that will be the same day, next day, or 2 to 3 days. And if you do that multiple times in a week, then that puzzle becomes really complicated for consumers in the city that are working during the day and maybe forget that they ordered something yesterday that is arriving today, or they ordered something on Friday because of the weekend. It's only being delivered not on Monday because the logistic chain only starts on Tuesday. It becomes really complicated. And what we try to do as parcels is we say, well, forget all this complexity. Just have your stuff, send it to this store, which is local. And you can send everything to that store, and you pick it up when it's convenient for you. And an interesting thing that is happening is that when people do that, then at the moment, 3/4 of our users, they pick up bundled parcels. So it's interesting because, the whole web shops and e-commerce thinks that most consumers want stuff now and same day, which is expensive and very ecologically disastrous, I can tell. And the consumers that we have in our store. They say, well, I don't care. I mean, I will be in your store or in the neighborhood of your store this week on Friday, and I'll pick up all the parcels that you collected for me on Friday. And I don't need all the parcels every day immediately. So that's interesting. And then a last comment that I wanted to make, what I found really interesting, especially this last year in the Netherlands, for our Brazilian friends, Amazon arrived in the Netherlands, very recently, and I saw that coming because I think they arrived. Walter would probably know better than I, but not that long ago. But I saw already last year Amazon orders rise in the stores. I think that started in August last year, and they were not yet in Holland at that time. The biggest store in Holland in August was Bol, which is a kind of Amazon, but then a Dutch version. And Bol was the biggest in August, by far. Then in September, Amazon was equal with Bol. In December, they tripled. They were tripled, and they're still not in Holland yet in December, but they were already 3 times the size of Bol. And this went on and went on. Interestingly, the same phenomenon is happening at the moment with Vinted. I'm not sure if people know Vinted, but it's a second-hand. You can sell your clothing to others via using Vinted. And this store didn't exist in January. It had a 0.2% market share. And in April, it had a 10% market share. So in just 4 months, it surpassed not only Bol, but it also surpassed Amazon. And it's now triple the size of Amazon, which is, I think, a very interesting phenomenon in a market that I've never seen before. The volatility in e-commerce is enormous. And all these logistic movements that are very complicated in the last mile, if you add that up, are very complicated. And I think what we see, if you solve that with a very simple concept, because parcels is just a store, it's not nothing more that is dedicated for parcels, then consumers all of a sudden let go of the complexity and just let everything ship to that store and pick it up. 99% of our users pick up stuff. They don't let anything home delivered anymore. And it's that simple.
Thank you, Hans. I mean, I think it's amazing how you can change consumer behavior, right? Through simple things. I mean, that's what caught my attention on your speech is like, let's change a little bit the consumer behavior. However, you still can change, as you said, the carrier's behavior, who they believe are the consumer. I think that's an important point. Despite the fact that you mentioned that you changed the behavior so people could pick up at your store the goods that they bought, send to the store, and then you pick up whenever it's more convenient. The carriers are still there. I mean, they're still there, and they still need to provide the services to deliver to your store or to deliver to your clients, not the consumers, but your clients of your consumer. So the problem is still there with the carriers, and I think I think that's an important issue to move from carriers thinking about the people or the person who pays him or her being the ultimate customer for the carrier and not the final consumer. So I think that's an important deal, especially when we are talking about e-commerce, especially when we are talking about online purchasing, which is increasing significantly. Interesting enough, I want to just point to 2 things already. Also, on your speech, is the change in consumer behavior made our life of providing service level easier, right? I mean, and I'm referring back to Priscilla. What used to be something that we created, very, very big monsters, that once they buy something online, they want to receive within 24 hours or less, and most and all that you mentioned for free. We are able, through this, to really change this behavior in a nice way, which has all the implications about sustainability, and that you mentioned also in the cities, less traffic. I would say that some of them even go by bike or by walking, and depending on their condition and the proximity of the store to their home. So there's also a lot of other implications. Nevertheless, and I'm going to get back to Walther through this transition here. Nevertheless, I remember that Walther mentioned that the parcels got big and big and big. Steven said that with his hands. And I said, oh, wow. So now I see Hans talking to me, saying that everybody bundle the products and pick up at the stores. Well, they do that with big and big parcels. Walther, let me refer back to this. Well, how you make this solution still valid?
Now, first of all, the change in e-commerce could be temporarily.
Okay.
Because stores are opening again and people are not afraid to go to stores.
Yes.
Second is that if you take the space which is available in light commercial vehicles, there's still plenty of space.
Okay.
So they can do it quite efficiently, but the handling is becoming more and more complicated. Of course, I'm not going to pick up a large parcel at Hans's location. You go to Hans where you have like some smaller parcels. Yesterday I got a new washing machine delivered at home. A Miele, 60 kilos. I'm not seeing myself pick it up. Yeah. Although once one of my suppliers, Praxis, a do-it-yourself chain, delivered something of 60 kilos via UPS, and they shipped it to the parcel store. I said 60 kilos. How am I going to put that on my bike? Or so finally we decided together to send it back. But I see, because some of the questions we now see on YouTube channel is about, will it lead to congestion? And maybe two data. We've seen a growth worldwide in e-commerce 15% on a year-to-year basis. We see a growth in the number of light commercial vehicles for parcels with just 3%. So there's a huge increase in productivity still possible by better route planning, taking the air out of parcels, because that's a better, parcels have 50 to 80% air, which if we would take them out, would make a cargo bike probably the best solution to ship. And making sure with address intelligence and giving the options like Hans is offering to consumers, the first time right percentage could be much higher. But once again, out of 10 vehicles in the cities worldwide, only one is doing commercial freight. Out of the one vehicle, let's make it a 100, only 5 to 8% worldwide is parcel related, of which half is business to business parcels, because the business to business parcel market is still much larger than business to consumer. So if people say that parcel shipments lead to congestion, it's simply not true, but they lead to nuisance, noise. They're there, they park on the middle of the street. So for cities worldwide, if you still want to have your parcels shipped to the people living in your city, make sure that there are enough loading and unloading zones so they can stop. And second is give them the digital information. We call that intelligent access. It's a new term which will be very vital to cities. We'll say to this truck driver, go to that loading zone. And if you're a smart planner, you park your car there and take the porter model. Porter is like you walk and do the deliveries. Like in London, there's been a lot of research. Actually driving with the vehicle is the silliest thing you can do. You should be delivering. And I think in the future, and I was very helpful with what Felipe said, is robotization combined with containerization that might lead the way. So you enter into a city with a lot of smaller trains, like a company in Germany, Duck Train, is already preparing. They go with 8 or 12 little shuttles in town. The shuttles are autonomously, so they're driven by a truck driver. But in the city, they're autonomously going to a loading and unloading zone. They do the deliveries and later they're picked up when they're empty. Which could be a great white label solution for shipments in cities like yours. Small, light, electric, safe, autonomous. And so that's why I was very happy with the remark Felipe made about the robotization. And I'm quite interested to hear how things are going in Sao Paulo.
Interesting. Interesting. Thanks, Walther. I think you also started our interaction with the public here. I'm very curious to, after a while, love to hear Henriette again about this concept of smart cities. Is this part of smart cities, the things that Walther mentioned, the things that we're mentioning, in terms of having real information flowing, more digital, I think is completely part of. But before you address this, Henriette, if you allow me, I want to get Felipe to mention things like here, and there's a question from Ana Maria Minucci. Here in Brazil, we use a lot of informal jobs, motoboys, our dear friends, to deliver goods. This is not good because they don't pay income tax. How can we solve this problem? And specifically, since I understand, Felipe, that you, at the end, through your platform, to VUX, at the end, you really try to connect drivers and demanders of transportation. How do you see this issue about informal jobs like motorboys, especially in the urban cities? So with that, I change to Felipe, and then I get back to you, Henriette.
Yeah, good question. Even though we work with a little bit larger vehicles in VUX, we do work with motor couriers as well. And it's a good question, because it's not only the problem that they do not pay taxes. Actually, they pay a small tax, but I think the main problem is how to make it, how to change the legislation so we can protect them, because it's a dangerous job. You ride a motorbike inside a big city such as São Paulo. It's not well paid job, and it's a very, very important job, especially during COVID-19. They are actually being very helpful with with flattening the curve. Everybody's in home, and you can order something in the internet and receive a motor courier with the package. So basically, I think the question is not about how making them paying more tax, but how making them or their contractor to protect them through maybe taxes, through insurance, through social security. But there are more things that are important to adequate the legislation in order to protect the motor couriers, and also in order to allow crowdsourcing in Brazil, which is very, very important to make logistics more flexible, urban centers more smart. So I think that's the angle that I would go for it. And I think there is actually a problem in these terms. We need to find ways to protect these independent drivers, for sure. In larger vehicles, we have a current legislation that works well. For example, for social security and so on. So you can be an owner operator or an independent service provider, and you can have a little bit more rights than social security. So we should rethink about this new way of dealing with these independent drivers and how we can protect them.
Thank you, Felipe. As I mentioned, and I'm going to get to you, Priscilla, pretty soon. Let me just get Henriette back in the discussion here. There is a huge difference, or Brazil is, geographically speaking, much larger than the Netherlands. So how could one country, in your opinion, collaborate with another? And I would instigate you or promote with you, especially in the issues like smart cities, since we're talking about urban logistics. So given the size of Brazil, very different from the Netherlands, I would say even the size you already mentioned of São Paulo compared to Amsterdam in terms of number of people. How do you think this collaboration can work out? And if you can touch upon the smart cities, which I think is close to your heart, would be interesting.
Yeah, I will give a reaction because this is a complicated one. Europe is like a bit in the Middle Ages when it concerns collaboration, certainly the parcel industry. If you get a parcel from Germany, the cost is 4 times of what the cost is when you do it in the Netherlands alone. There are at least 3-4 different labels on there. The data on the labels don't work for other companies. So for cross-border shipments, it's disaster. Fortunately, there's also some good news. First of all, on the side of ITS systems, intelligent transport systems, used on motorways, but in the future also in cities, those are from a European perspective standardized. So my truck, if it's driving around in Europe in any city, can get the same kind of information. That's good news for efficiency. But it starts with this single label. So the European Union is now putting great pressure on companies, web stores, but specifically on the parcel providers, because it's not good for consumers that we are in that situation. We pay way too much money, and we have no market transparency in Europe. It's way too complicated to cross up, to go to this one single label. So there's a big project going on this, making a unified label with unified codes that everybody can use. So any parcel provider can actually ship from anywhere to anywhere. And it's very much, there's a very complicated term for that, used in the scientific world and at the European research program. It's called physical internet. And you will hear much more about it in the next years. So Google physical internet, you will find a lot of the roadmaps on how to get one European Union. Because you're right, Brazil is a huge country. Not too many languages. In Europe, we have many languages, many small countries, many borders, and everybody's making money because of these inefficiencies, and that should stop.
And yet, you want to complement that regarding a broader perspective of smart cities and the difference, how it can collaborate, please?
First about cooperation and the difference of size of the Netherlands and Brazil. The Dutch companies and also municipalities are working together with Chinese cities, with Indian cities, with American cities. So I don't think that size matters much in that sense. It's what you have to offer. And I think that we in the Netherlands have really developed interesting concepts to share. What is a smart city? There is no definition of smart city. Building bicycle lanes can be very smart if you have certain problems to solve. But when you look at what generally is meant by smart cities is trying to solve problems in an integrated way, which make a city more efficient and also more healthy. And that's.
Can I go forward on that, Henriette? Because I think smart cities, and that's worldwide, can do 3 things. First of all, make your traffic data, your road data, incident data digitally available. And that would really help us doing better planning. Also, the loading and unloading zones. The second one is smart, is also preparing ourselves for a world where we have autonomous last mile, that we also create space for that. And the third one is, and also cities can help us there. Amsterdam now, 5% of the deliveries are done with cargo bikes, which is really good news. Safe, no air pollution, creates great job opportunities. Smart cities can help us by making parking spaces, for instance, for these cargo bikes, by special routes. And back again to the first item, a cargo bike can drive different routes than a van. So we need like traffic data on how to drive with our cargo bike. I think there's a lot of possibilities for smart cities. And the last thing a smart city can do is think about hubs. What we are doing in major cities all over the world is focus on building houses. Building houses mean that we really push out companies out of a city and the distances between them. In rethinking our cities and doing urban planning and doing smart urban planning, we must create room for logistic companies, which means micro hubs in the city, sometimes even temporarily mobile hubs, some bigger hubs around the city centers, pickup points like Hans is offering, and around the city, white label solutions where companies can collaborate. And it will be necessary if going to zero emission. We also need smart charging on those hubs. So a lot of potential for smart cities.
Yeah, Thank you, Walter. And I do believe, if I understood also correctly, yet, I mean, it is much broader than the urban logistics when we talk about smart cities. Of course, it can have a big impact on the urban logistics, which is the main topic of the workshop, of this webinar. But I want to move to our last question. I want to recognize there were several questions here through the chat, and we'll collect them and try to divide among ourselves to see if we can provide some answers to the people who asked. But I also want to come out with a final call, which is to Priscilla. Look at the responsibility, huh, Priscilla? The last one to talk. So, no, I still have a last word, Priscilla. But But just to mention one thing here, Priscilla, and I want to refer to a question. Just a minute, I want to get my here right. Okay, so there was a question from Leonardo saying that, which I think touched upon the research that you guys are doing in an interesting point of view. For countries with social inequality, what is the trend to the consumer's behavior if a significant part of the population, like ourselves here, don't have access to this new experience created by the pandemic or this crisis that we're living? So how, in a very social inequalities society, how do we make sure that the less advantaged ones have these experiences that others are having given the crisis? So I think that's an interesting question. I'll just for everybody to mention to everybody, this is the last question we're going to answer. I'm going to do a final closing very quickly. So if you guys can hold for some more time, I would appreciate. So Priscilla, please provide your answer.
In our, I don't have the data open here by country, but we have research in Brazil, in India, and some highlights. Unfortunately, for those countries in which there is a huge social difference and access to technology, the biggest part of the population has no access to this, and we are seeing this here in our neighborhood in São Paulo. We can see very regions that a lot of regions that there is no in slums, for example, there's no such access. In what is happening is that something curious. It is about collaboration. So we saw that in the time of crisis, we saw many of communities working in a collaborative way to support those who has less access to technology to afford them. We could see the government initiative to do to enter into the project to get the payment by internet, and it was a disaster. So there's a huge lines in front of the banks because people has no access to do it online. So there's too many issues that we are discussing. How to get to provide technology for those less affordable. There's a level in which we can reach them in a collaborative way. So putting, as Hans mentioned, the centers to pick up centers. So technological centers also to support them. So some of them are already existing by government. For example, you have access in the Poupa Tempo sites and other small communities. But it's something that we can, in a social way, to come up with ideas. But the behavior, the consumption behavior has changed anyway. What happens to those that in our research we saw, those that dramatically change their behavior in terms of choosing products, reduce consumption to the most basic items, and unfortunately for some, no items at all because they were without jobs. but it's a different problem. And this changing dramatically has, how can I say, impact also how the industry are thinking about their portfolio, because they don't believe that their portfolio would remain the same, because consumers buy choice because they have no way to buy more expensive stuff, or by forcing by availability, they change their the consumption. And how this is gonna be happening, or people that used to choose one kind of soap, they would have to change another to choose another one. They're gonna come back to the more expensive one. And how the entire supply chain from the beginning of the chain, their suppliers is gonna be changed to achieve the final consumption. So it's not a very direct answer, but the first one, the collaboration is still to make available technology for their consumption is one thing that we saw in communities. So I saw, because I was working with something like this in hospitals and other stuff. And also the change in the portfolio and in the items that people are consuming. So this is something that's gonna change our habits and the entire supply chain.
Thank you, Priscilla. I think we are getting close to an end. I want to make a call of action, several call of actions here. I think we touch upon several things. I think, before forgetting, I thank you all the participants here, all the invitees here that were the panelists. Thank you for making your interventions very quick and direct. That allowed us to make it more dynamic and answer and touch upon different dimensions. I appreciate that a lot. I also appreciate all the public, and I have the public here with a lot of questions that we are not able to touch. And with that, I would like to leave with you with a couple of notes, saying that it's our intention. Please follow up on us on the social media or at the Insper site. We are going to make sure that we publish. Perhaps publish is a too fancy word, but we at least write something up about this webinar and make it available to a broader audience, including to those who participated. Hopefully, we will be able to answer some of the questions who were in the chat window here that we did not have time to address them. So, having said that, I'll just finalize here in terms of call to action. I'm projecting one screen, 2 slides, just to finalize. Hopefully, you guys are seeing it. So please go after Insper website. There's a lot of opportunities, different courses, different formats that you guys can get, specifically on this new world, new normal. We experience different formats, much more online, in a different format than with a lot of participation of the students online. So please follow up us through there, specifically because we are going to make sure that we publish something about this webinar there. And finally, if anybody wants to have an email to contact, here's my email. I'll make sure that any contact that you guys need, ask specific questions to the panelists, I'll pass to them if you allow me to send, if you send me an email. After all, thanks a lot, everybody, panelists, people that supported us during this webinar, which were not few, but a lot of them, and the participants also that made this much more interesting, given the questions that were made. With that, I conclude the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you the next time, guys. Hopefully soon.
Bye.
Bye.